This video was sponsored by Into the AM. I have played almost every war game under the sun, and it's kind of rare when a new war game catches my eye, which is a little bit of a lie, but it's rare for me to go full force and get everything for the game. But recently, a little oddball war game has caught my attention, and it's a little game called Quar. Number one, name amazing, Quar. But number two, it's the oddest game, with miniatures that feature these little anteater fellas with the body type of Winnie the Pooh. And the game is kind of a weird World War I, and it's delightful. It's the best thing ever. It's so weird, it's so odd, and I like it so much. Number one, it's really easy. This is the rule book. It's very, very thin. Only this much of it is the rules, and then this is all the lore. And there's lore. There's lore for these little anteaters. The clash of rifles, this Quar's War, features the Crusaders versus the Copterans. And there's the Copterans are the noble ruling class who are they're doing fine, and then the upstart Crusaders who are trying to wage a gigantic war in the hopes of the war coming to an end, because they don't like being ruled over by the Copterans, and so they're hoping that this gigantic war will be the war to end all wars, which kind of leads it into the World War I aesthetic. But it's really, really interesting. I play a lot of war games, and sometimes it's really, really fun to get into a game that's based on something like Star Wars Shatterpoint or Star Wars Legion, where you can sort of be like, ooh, I wonder when the Dark Troopers are gonna come into the game. But then when you find something absolutely brand spanking new called Quar, where you read it and you're not sure how you're supposed to pronounce the name of the game, and then all of a sudden you start to look into it, and everything about it is brand spanking new. What are these little things? I didn't even know they were anteaters until I read the lore. I thought they were worms with Piglet's body. They're so bizarre, and they're wearing these World War I uniforms and carrying these odd rifles. But then you start to learn, and you sort of start to get invested with these cute little guys. And so I got everything. Quar has actually existed for a very long time, but recently it's gotten new legs because Wargames Atlantic is producing some plastic miniatures for the game. There's currently 2 sprues, one for the Crusader and one for the Copterans. I got the Copterans, and they're really easy to build. They remind me a lot of the old Tamiya soldiers that you could get at hobby shops next to the airplanes and the tanks and the model railroad kits. But the sprues are really, really good. There's not a lot of mold lines to clean. And the guns, the weapons. Number one, all of these weapons have lore, which ones you're allowed to take and which ones you are good and bad. The Copterans have the long guns. The guns are called, wait, I wanna get the name right. The Harlech. The Harlech rifle. It gets to shoot 2 more inches in range, and it's a little tiny bit more accurate to the Crusaders. Their gun is called the Bogan. The Crusaders, Sean plays the Crusaders. The Bogan is lame. The Harlech is the cool gun. And these miniatures have captured my heart. The clothing that these guys wear is very much inspired by World War II. You would not catch them in a t-shirt like this, although this is a very cool t-shirt from today's sponsor. Have you been wondering what that perfect Christmas gift might be to bring out someone's style? Well, then look no further than Into the AM. Into the AM has all the coolest fashion you can think of, whether all-day pants, joggers, flannels, t-shirts, or their claim to fame, graphic tees. Everything you could want can be found at their website. You will always see me rocking Into the AM shirts in my videos, peeking out from under my apron. I gotta wear the apron to keep them nice. And they have some new designs hitting their web store. One of their new designs, the wolf shirt, I know would look really, really good on a buddy of mine who always wears wolf t-shirts. I am more of an astronaut guy myself. I love a good melancholy astronaut, and I have most of the Into the AM astronaut shirts, including my personal favorite, Astro Pump. Into the AM has a huge selection of original artwork printed on high quality and very comfortable clothing, so I can always look my best whether I'm painting or gaming. Right now, if you click on the link in the description below, you can get an extra 10% off of your purchase, so take advantage while you can to get some of these cool shirts today. One thing that immediately jumped out to me about Quar is the weird artwork. Kind of this watercolor illustration that reminds me of almost like children's books of these funny little fellas. And you've got the weirdness of this cutesy art mixed with a war setting. It's really, really interesting. This kind of battle between cuteness and conflicts, and the lore is a little bit sad and depressing. It's like a Game of Thrones level, like, regicide. These little anteater fellas are really in the thick of it, fighting this gigantic war. All they want to do is eat bugs. But instead, they're putting on their battle plate and heading off to war. I have put together I put together a lot of Quar, and I have a lot of Quar, but this little 10-man squad is my proper 300-point force. In terms of gameplay, Quar is very interesting. The rules are very, very simple, but one thing I always love is mechanics that force you and your opponent to both do things in like the same turn, and it uses an activation deck. If anyone has played Bolt Action or Star Wars Legion, you'll know an activation deck, like a random draw activation deck, you actually don't have you have a random draw, but you get to decide what your actions are gonna be, which is really nice because then it feels like you're the general leading your forces. What you don't know is how many activations you get. So in this deck, there are trees with leaves, between 3 and 5 leaves. And so when it's my turn to activate my Quar force, I know that I've got 3 actions. But I don't know if I've got any more, because when I start my turn, my opponent draws a card, looks at it, and keeps it to himself. And then I take 3 actions, and then I have to ask my opponent, do I have a 4th action? And then they look at the card, and then they look back at me, and then they wait a really long time, and then they say, you do have a 4th action. And so then I get to take a 4th action. And then I know in that deck, there are trees with 5 leaves. And so I get to ask again, do I get to take a 5th action? And then they look at the card and then they look at me and then they wait a long time and then they go, no, you're done. And then I get to draw a card for them and then they take their turn. And so that's a really fun way to add a little bit of a random element to the game and to kind of force that interaction between you and your opponent. It's really, really fun and really, really interesting. The game is a skirmish level war game where you play with about 10 Quars. You play on a 2x2 game board, which is very small, which is very nice. It means that you don't have to get as much stuff all together to get a full force going. And I have built 9 guys actually, because a typical game is played at between 200 and 300 points. So for just under 300 points, I could build 9 guys, broken into a rifle squad and a gunner squad, because Quar, of course, has light machine guns. And so I have a light machine gun squad of Quar. This is the force that I can play with in the Quar's War Pocket Rifler's Handbook, the base rules for the game, and I do have some expansions. I have the Trench Runners, which have this little like bandits mask, and I did just a tiny little conversion and I put some green stuff to make it into a spooky, scary skull, and now it's my favorite thing ever, and so I use that as inspiration to kitbash all of these guys. And you might have noticed that these guys look very weird. I covered them in milliput and texture paste and grass tufts. And the reason for that is because there's another game called Turnip 28. And multiple people have explained to me what Turnip 28 is, and I still have no clue what that game is, but it looks like they're having a lot of fun. So I wanted to get in on it. And so I have kitbashed these guys into kind of the spookiest little Quars you've ever seen. I made a little banner for my lieutenant, and I made the little skull, but it's got these mushrooms growing out of it. It reminds me of, I played a video game Darkwood, which is a really, really good scary horror game. And so these guys remind me of something that could just like come out of the forest in Darkwood and just be spooky and weird. I gave all of their Harlack rifles, these little bayonets that I carved out of plastic card. I had so much fun putting these guys together, using all sorts of epic basing bits and my grass tufts. These are unpainted, so I've just finished kitbashing these guys together. This 60 millimeter tank, I have zenithaled, or I have put my undershading on with the airbrush, and then my little trench runners, I've actually finished painting. And I think these guys, I painted all 3 of them in about an hour. They're really, really easy to paint. They have just the right amount of detail, and I really, really like how they turned out, and I can't wait to have the full force. Right now, getting into Quar, you kind of have 2 options. You can either get the Clash of Rifles, which gives you 12 Koftirans or 12 Crusaders, and you only need 10 per side to play the game. And so this box gives you everything you need, including the rule book and the activation cards and the dice. Or you could just go whole hog into one particular faction, which I also did, and I got the Koftiran box. This is 24 guys. That is a massive, massive Quar army. So it's just really, really fun to have so much Quar. Right now, there's not that much in the way of expansions, but it seems like this game has got some legs. Right now, there's tanks that you can get. There's a few different upgrade things. And reading the lore, there's a lot of other kind of smaller factions and sub-factions and other things that could be added to the game. The Crusaders have airships. And man, do I want to see a Quar airship. What's really, really tickled me about this game is that it's its own thing. And so it kind of gives me the freedom to make it my own thing. Whether that is turning my guys into weird Turnip 28 Winnie the Pooh monstrosities, or just coming up with my own data sheets or my own things that I want to do, scenarios. It's kind of tricky. Like I play a lot of 40K and it's really hard to make scenarios because it's really, you can say we're gonna tackle a giant spaceport, but then you have to build a giant spaceport and figure out all the terrain and make a giant board. 2 foot by 2 foot game board is pretty easy to whip something up for a 2 foot by 2 foot game board. And the different activations that these guys can take, you can get gobsmacked. That actually happens a lot. You get gobsmacked a lot in the game, and that is when one of your guys is rattled. And so they only have a certain number of simple actions they can do before they spend one action to get ungobsmacked so that they can get back into the fight. It's really hard to do damage in this game, so you actually get to play with your toys for a nice long time. Although it does hurt pretty bad when one of your little Quar guys dies because they're your guys. They're your little guys. This poor little guy with the lantern. I would be devastated if he died. Oh, and I know Sean is gonna go for lantern guy. For the leader of my Quar force, the Yaw Drill, I gave him the same scary mask that I did the Trench Crusaders, but his head has like a little buckle that keeps his mask on. And he's got his little hand up in the air and he's got a mushroom growing out of his back. When I was kitbashing these guys, I was kind of thinking about like the lore of them. And I think there are just kind of fellas. Like I feel like they could maybe fit in the Quar universe. The Quar, it does have some magic elements to it a little bit. It's really more the world. It's essentially Earth, but there's these natural disasters that happen kind of so constantly that it's considered normal. And so sometimes like there'll just be like an ice age for a season and then things will kind of go back to normal. And so maybe there are some Quar that just love the earth. And so they put mud and dirt on themselves so that mushrooms will grow because the mushrooms just make them better. Man, I really, really dig Quar. I had so much fun. Just one sprue. There's only one sprue to play around with, but there's a lot that you can do with this sprue. Tons of extra arms, tons of different guns, tons of different head options, posability options. Everyone loves a little pocket, a little bandolier, a little holster that you can glue onto their side. And there are more available as STLs on the website. So there's even more fun stuff. There's a Quar that's not wearing a hat or a helmet, and it's weird. They're weird dudes. It's just a noodle, like a little wormy face. It's kind of creepy looking, but that's what I like. I like that it's cute, but it's also a little weird and wrong and creepy looking. And those are the sorts of games that really kind of perk my interest because, it's cool to see Dark Troopers in the new Star Wars game because they were in the new Star Wars show. But you kind of know what's coming, you know what's happening. I think it'd be really cool if a war game that was actually based on an IP came up with something new. I think that would be really, really cool. Tiny tangent, but right now, Star Wars Lego sucks because they're just redoing the ships from the movies. It's Lego. Just invent something. Invent a ship that no one's ever seen before. Quar is something that no one has ever seen before, and it's so interesting, and it's so neat, and it's so flavorful and fun and interesting. There is a little bag of baguettes. Of course I need a bag of baguettes. It's so silly, and it's so fun, and it's so memorable. I don't necessarily remember every B1 battle droid that I paint for Star Wars Legion, but I'll remember the guy who's got baguettes next to his mushroom that's growing out of his ears. I am really excited to go down the Quar rabbit hole. I've got my force almost completely put together, but really I need one of the tanks. The tanks are really, really cool. They are inspired by World War I, but they're kind of inspired by the fantasy ideas or the most extreme and oddball tanks of the age. The Copterans tank is essentially a giant potato. It's just 100% tracks, where the Crusaders tank is a little bit more typical, but typical feels like the wrong word for a tank with really long, really thin treads and just a giant like bunker just sitting on top of it. Definitely need to get a few of those. I wonder how many points those would be in game. If 10 Copterans are about 300 points, I wonder if a tank is like 500 points. What kind of a force multiplier is the tank? And as my little riflers play on the tabletop, they're gonna come up with little backstories, little magical things that can happen. Even though I play the guys who like to stand back and shoot, I've given all of them bayonets because I think I'm gonna go for close combat. It doesn't make a lot of sense because literally my guys are designed, they get to move a little bit more, they get to shoot from a little bit further away. I should stay back and shoot, but it's a little more fun to get in there. It's a little bit more interesting. And I mean, I've got these trench crusaders. They can just run around and stab people, and they've got those scary masks. That's gonna scare the other Quar players, and it's gonna make me stab just a little bit better in the game. And I've got a 60mm gun. This can be the thing that stands back and shoots. I made a little tree growing out of the side of it because I just decided that nothing had to make any sense. And so I just put on the milliput. I'm really sad. I put one little mushroom as a sight for this gun and I broke it off because I dropped it. But I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna find another tiny little mushroom and I'm gonna glue that on. Knowing that I wanted to get this game running up nice and quick, I decided on a really, really simple paint job. I'm going with orange skin with yellow polka dots. And it does seem really, really easy to paint. The hardest part was their skulls, but the skulls are so awesome that it doesn't bother me one bit, spending a little bit of extra time making those skulls perfect. Only on the heroes and the special units. Everybody else gets a hat with mushrooms and dirt and grass growing out of it. I used epic basing bits to give these guys a little bit of a running through the trenches military feel, and I actually put them all on Cobalt Keep bases because every time I start a new war game, I kind of want it to go a little bit better than previous war games. My 40k armies are a mess because some of those models I put together in high school and some of those models I put together last week. And with Quar, I want everything to be absolutely perfect. So they've already gotten magnets in all of their bases, and it's gonna be really nice and it's gonna be really pretty. Maybe I'll make a scenic, like a scenic display board for them because they're just little fellas. It wouldn't even be that much work. And on the big old tank, whenever I get it, that baked potato of a tank, I wanna have a lot of big scoopy skull or big scary skulls sticking out the top of it. I had this idea in my head. This might be too much, but I want the tank, and then I want a literal tree growing out of the middle of the tank, and then from the branches, nooses? Is that too bad? Is that too mean? It would look really cool though. Maybe that's a little much, but they're anteaters. They're not people. Well, they kind of are people to me, but maybe my guys are spooky and scary enough to make that happen. And how good would it look? I like starting a new game where there's no limits. There's nothing. I mean, that's kind of true of anything. I could make a Star Wars Legion army that's completely wacky, but it doesn't feel right. Like I do. The reason that I like the Star Wars games and the 40k games is because I really like those universes. And so it makes me happy when my stormtroopers look like they did in A New Hope, when I was watching that movie with my grandma when I was 4. But this is something weird and new, and I get to experience it however I want, and I get to make it whatever I want. And it was really cheap. This is actually a really, really cheap war game to get into. The starter box is $80 and 24 Quar are 40. I actually found these at a friendly local game store, which blew my mind. Cause they have the normal stuff. They've got a little bit of 40k, they got a little bit of bolt action. And then on the bottom shelf, a little bit hidden, was a game called Quar. I remember first seeing these models on Pinterest. And I remember I would see them out of the corner of my eye every now and then. And I'm like, I don't even get what that is. It doesn't look like a human. It doesn't really look like an alien because usually people make aliens look cooler or more interesting or more like something. But then I started to notice them more and more, and I found the website and I got some models and I got to experience those models, and I caught the Quar bug. And I hope you guys catch the Quar bug too. Get some Quar. They're really, really interesting. And I think that this game is going to take off a little bit. The game plays really nice and easy. The stat lines are really easy. The weapons are all tied to the stat line of the dude, and so it makes it really easy to kind of invent your own weapons or your own attributes, and you don't need that much terrain. But if you do, it can be found at EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch, like the new Nick and Jay dice, which are D6s, and you can roll D6s in Quar, and it's the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. For the month of December, we have made The Fall, Part 1, Buildings. The easiest way to get a ton of terrain really fast. This set focuses on printable decorations for cardboard, foam core, or Pringles cans buildings. Build out a grimdark militarized fort dripping with details, with a selection of sandbag-laden battlements, barbed wire defenses, armored wall decorations, and noble eagle lookout posts. This set allows for large terrain to be built out in record time, and it has printable textures to add detail and decoration to take this terrain to the next level. This is the first of 3 releases that focus on getting a proper 40k board up and running as easily as possible. Let me know in the comments below, what do you guys think of Quar? It's been out there for a while now. I'm sure some of you guys have seen it. Is it the cutest, weirdest, silliest thing you've ever seen? Have you gotten a chance to play Quar? What do you think of it? Do you want to get into Quar now that you've seen the weird minis and you just want to kit bash and convert and paint these things? The thing that's kind of perfect about Quar is I've always kind of wanted to get into a historical war game, but I really don't care, which is too bad because Sean loves like historical history. Nick is a huge World War II buff, but But this is kind of my dipping my toe into historical war games because they look a little bit World War I-y, but their tank looks like a potato. And don't forget to click the link in the description and check out Into the AM for an additional 10% off your purchase today.